Hello, my wild ones. I'm in the middle of a wild field right now, and I wanted to introduce today's interview. Today's interview is with Rebecca Beyer. I'm just like kind of, a little fan struck. You can listen to it as a podcast, or you can watch us react to each other. Either way, I hope you enjoy, and thank you so much to Rebecca for having this experience with me. I want to just promote her book as much as I can. It is an incredible book, and she has a second book coming out as well. So the first book is Wild Witchcraft, and that is the one that you need to own on your shelf right now. That is the one that you need to purchase. I have put all of the information below for you. It is such a worthy book to have as a reference guide. And it's also just an incredible book just to inspire your wild witchcraft. Well, here we are. I want to introduce Rebecca Beyer, who is the author of Wild Witchcraft, which I read cover to cover in a matter of days. It is now one of my favorite reference books. She is the woman behind Spicebush School of Old Craft. She lives in the mountains of Western North Carolina. She's a homesteader, a tattoo artist, a forager, traditional witch, and Appalachian folk medicine practitioner. Her Instagram is Blood and Spicebush, and her website is listed in the description for us all. Rebecca's energy is creative, inspiring, and one that is succinct with the harmonies of nature. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks for saying that. It's nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. So I just want to jump right in. I have my own definition of what I think a wild witch is, and I think a lot of that is being defined right now. So I just wanted to give you the space to jump in and kind of add your definition, since you have written the original book called Wild Witchcraft. So I wanted to start out with that burning question that I know my viewers have, and that is, can you describe what you think a wild witch is, and are you yourself a wild witch?
That's a good question. It's funny because I did not pick the title for my book. My publishers did, and I liked it. I thought it was it's hard to say, like, what word brings foraging, herbalism, and gardening all together. I think Wild Witchcraft was chosen by my publishers as a kind of umbrella term to cover all of our kind of three sections of foraging, herbalism, and gardening. And then, of course, the rituals and the wheel of the year, because it kind of goes outside of the traditional ceremonial magic background that a lot of modern Wiccans practice, into the more traditional witchcraft, which is an animist bend. So for me, wild witchcraft is one way you could express an animistic worldview or belief system through the lens of traditional witchcraft. And that's kind of how I personally practice it. I don't necessarily call myself a wild witch. I call myself a traditional witch because I practice historical magic based off of early modern English, Irish, German, and Scottish folk magic. And that's specific to me. But everybody, comes to what they call themselves in a different way. So it's kind of a long answer, but
That brings up that question. Can anyone be a forager, and how did you yourself get started?
this is such a good question. Of course, I think, all of us come from a long line of foragers, no matter where our ancestors are from, and anyone can be a forager. And the number one internet conflict that comes up for me, and even when I was defending my master's thesis on Appalachian ethnobotany at App State, my biology professor in that sitting asked me, he's like, Becky, foraging isn't sustainable. I can't believe you're saying everybody could forage. And I told him, I was like, everybody eats food from monocrop farms. Like, that's not sustainable either. there's no black and white answer. I do believe theoretically all people can forage to whatever extent their ableness allows them,
Mm-hmm.
And then there's systems of oppression that prevent certain people from access to foraging spaces way more than others, like people of color, indigenous people, and other marginalized people. That's important. Doesn't mean they can't be foragers, but there's walls up against them pursuing that sometimes, often. But I think I have a spicy take, which is I do believe everyone could forage to an extent as part of a shifted worldview and food system with many other changes made as well. Just like everybody can't ride bikes or the roads would be clogged. You know what I mean? If every single human rode a bike, but that's not how things work. So when we say, is foraging sustainable? To me, it's like, yes, and it's part of a system that needs changing. And it doesn't have to be able to be done by every human for it to be sustainable. So, yes, I think everyone can be a forager. And I think it's part of a complex conversation. Does that make sense?
I completely agree. And there's state rules, there's regulation, there's culture
Yeah.
around it. There's so many layers to this conversation. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, should I not forage because it's bad for the environment? This comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Totally. You know, Black Forager on TikTok, who's Alexis, she's super popular now because I think because she's so fun and nice and cute and just like she has such a friendly, loving, and welcoming way she talks about plants. It's really not gatekeepy or like shaming, but it's very science based, it's very joy based. And I think she had a great, people come for her all the time about foraging being unsustainable. And if you look her up and look up what she says about it, I would highly recommend. I'll try to help you find the video. But, you know, ethical foraging is such a place based question. You know, where I live in Appalachia, I could eat just invasive plants for the rest of my life and never put a dent in the environment as my individual self here. My neighborhood in Barnardsville, North Carolina could all eat just invasive plants and probably never put a dent in them for their lives, you know? But if you live in Colorado, in desert ecosystems, they're much more delicate and water dependent. There are greater questions about sustainability that don't come up, you know? So to me, ethical foraging is place based. It's based around systems of oppression and questions around that. And it's based around unique situational awareness. So there's really no one size fits all. And that's difficult because we want that, you know, and we just can't have it.
So it sounds like you're saying it really just depends on where you live. It's important to look at the environment that you're living in. Like you were mentioning, the desert is very delicate. Whereas if you live where I am, I'm in New York, and it's just like forest, just rich forest and for miles. And yeah, I relate to what you're saying, where it's like I could not even make a dent in this. And not everybody wants to forage. That's another thing that
Yes.
don't like. No, there are people who just would never. And
Many
so
people. Yes.
that's the cultural piece that I think that is missing is like, you know, if you don't grow up being a forager, or have a history and a relationship to the land in this way, you might not want to embrace that. You might not need to. So
No, there's no shame in it either. Like a friend, you know, I hunt and harvest my own meat from the forest also and hunt deer and things and like that. And somebody told me I could never butcher a deer. I personally don't mind it. I actually enjoy it. I don't enjoy killing, but I enjoy the process of, you know, working with that animal. And I told them, I was like, do you think every single person traditionally butchered? Absolutely not. It's okay if you never want to do that, but you'll do something else. Maybe you'll cook it. Maybe you'll help preserve it. You know, like you don't have to do everything. And not everybody wants to do everything. And that's totally okay. So,
yeah, it's a key event usually because it's so much work.
exactly. I always appreciate when I have a hand.
Well, let's veer off and talk a little bit about herbalism. And I wanted to ask you, a lot of people who come to my channel will ask, about, well, how do I get started in herbalism? Is herbalism really that complex? And so I guess that's the question I wanted to hand off to you is, how did you get started in herbalism, and do you feel that it is complex?
That's a great question. I got started in it. I'll answer that first. Because I got sick. In my book, they asked me to write, part of my autobiography, and it was hard to be like, how did I get into this stuff? I was raised half the time in rural Eastern Pennsylvania and central New Jersey on a farm, and the other half of my childhood right outside New York City. So I did not grow up with plants. I grew up with livestock for sure, but I had no relationship with plants other than really liking to eat them until I was 18. And I moved to upstate New York to a college at Bard College. And I believe I had mono for about a year, and I had a chronic cough for months. It was horrific, and no doctors could tell me what was wrong with me. None of them thought to test me for mono for whatever reason. I went to 6 different doctors, and my nurse practitioner at my college ended up thinking to test me for mono, and my palpated my liver, and it was extremely inflamed. I was very sick, and I went to a little herb shop called Purple Shutter Herbs. At this point, I had transferred to the University of Vermont by the time I figured all this stuff out, and met Laura Brown, who has since passed from cancer, unfortunately, an herbalist who I really love. And she gave me a golden seal, bone set, and thyme, THYME, the plant, and told me how to make a decoction. And in 3 days, my cough was gone. And I was floored because I kind of thought plants were just for fun and that herbs were just kind of a historical thing. And I was a medieval history major at the time, and then switched to plant science after this happened. And that's when I really started getting into plants. And I got a degree in plant science and then a master's degree in Appalachian ethnobotany and the history of plant use in Appalachia, and devoted myself to working on farms. And that's kind of where I got into it. And I took lots of classes and I read a lot of books. I never went to herb school all the way. So I guess I'm an unconventional herbalist in that, but I've had many mentors. But a lot of what I've learned is from books, probably more than is normal and maybe smart, but
So starting out small and just adding a few things. So you initially had the help of an herbalist, and then how quickly did you feel comfortable going off on your own and just trying things?
it was a long time. Probably not until I was in my mid 20s did I really start treating myself for things that were more serious than getting a prescription from a friend that was an herbalist. And the first thing I worked on was a staph infection on my friend, and watching it resolve, it was amazing. It really showed me the power of herbs. And with my science background, I was always like, oh yeah, it makes total sense. But then, the magical portion comes in, and sometimes things happen and you just can't explain them with science, which is also really cool. And so you asked, is herbalism complex? And I would say it doesn't have to be, but it is. The way that herbs work, as a folk herbalist, you can know 10 herbs. You don't have to know 100 million plants. There's 4,000 herbs or plants in my region that I live in Appalachia. And I do not know them all, and I probably never will. But you only need to know 10 or 20 plants, and you can have a thriving, herbal.
I think that's what can make it complex, is trying to do too much and learn too much and fill your brain too much, where some people aren't memorizers. They have to have the experience. So in order to have the experience, you have to get sick.
Yeah,
That
totally.
that might take a lifetime to build your medicine cabinet.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're taking care, or if you're attempting to help with, a neighbor or your own children, or um, an animal, um, you can experiment a little bit. But I would say it's wonderful that you had an herbalist that you could build that relationship with plants, like that, that confidence with having that experimentation. And so do you think we're in consensus where we're saying, reach out to others, learn?
and read
Yeah.
books and go slow because it is complex.
Well, I definitely had some close calls at the beginning because, sometimes it's hard not to get overconfident or be like, well, it's natural. It can't be toxic. And I'm like, well, it's a lot of stuff that can kill you, but not that much, like not to scare you,
Also,
but some of it's serious.
you could overdo it. You can overdo something like for your liver. Like I've had an experience where I just overdid some infusions, and I was using, sometimes when things have high essential oils in it, then you can put strain, and everybody's different. Everybody's body processes plants and foods differently. So yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents, is that I think you're right. It can be so simple if you just limit yourself, not limit, but
Mhm.
build that relationship. And that's what's so great about your book. It really gives you a practical, um, coming from a witch perspective, you can see how you integrate plants into your witchcraft, which it basically takes you through the wheel of the year. And so you have these recipes that's why I think your book is more of a reference book, than anything, is it allows a witch to like live with your book for a while. Like I could probably live with your book for 5 years and still not do everything in it, and try things out and experiment. So it almost gives you the opportunity to kind of like get your feet wet a little bit and like try some things on, and then just sort of live our lives. I think sometimes when we think about becoming an herbalist, we think of like a year-long course, and then you're an herbalist. Like that's it. You're just done.
No,
And
no.
speaking of which, you teach, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit about that. I know whatever you can tell us. I know that you teach in person, and I think if anybody else feels as passionate about the book that I feel, they may be interested in that. And so I just, even though that was my last question, I think we should, or maybe it wasn't, but let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah, I have been teaching classes for almost 10 years now. And I started my blog in 2014, Blood and Spice Bush. And um I quickly, I began teaching foraging as a tour guide when I moved back to Asheville from Boone after grad school in 2016, and teaching, 3 or 4 times a week, multiple times a day sometimes, people who had never been in the woods how to eat plants and mushrooms and identify them was so incredible because everyone's like, what's that? What's that? What's that? And I'd have to be like, I don't know what that is. I'll look it up later. And I just learned so much so quickly working for No Taste Like Home, this company in Asheville that I used to work for. And it really propelled my teaching because it gave me a foot there. And I designed this course called Hedgecraft, which is still my like child. I've taught it for 7 years now. And it's just 5 classes. I try to keep it really chill. 5 Saturdays a year where we do seasonal hedgecraft lore. And my whole passion and like the whole reason I do any of this is because I want to create a traditional witchcraft tradition in Appalachia that's based in history, um, and this place. And so we can look at our own ancestral practices. We can look at what people have done in this region ancestrally for the diverse peoples that have lived here, and address cultural appropriation and also embrace the joy of ancestral practices we do know about through plants. And so that means herbal medicine, foraging, and folk foods and song. I love to sing, and I sing Appalachian ballads. And a part of that is in my witchcraft practice because many of those songs hold old magic and lore that made it through Catholicism and stuff. So all that together is the heart of my classes. And I also do a lot of conferences and workshops and stuff um, around the country sometimes, which is really fun. But I didn't do that many the past 2 years because of COVID.
I love that. So it's all on your website. And
Mhm.
if anyone lives in the area, they can find you. Um, and then just watch your work develop, because there's more, I'm sure, coming from you. I mean, you've got plenty of life left and
Hope.
plenty to give. So I'm
Oh,
sure more will come from you in the future. And we'll just watch your website.
yeah, I always have it updated. It's pretty regularly retouched.
So my next question is, do you identify as an herbalist, witch? And can you share a recipe or a practice that kind of screams herbalist witch?
Yeah, I identify as a folk herbalist.
Okay.
When I grow up, I'd love to study clinical herbalism more. I currently do first aid herbally at earth skills events, primitive skills events. But I think I identify more as a plant folklorist than a true herbalist. And to me, folk herbalism, one of my favorite things is a charm to ask elder if you can harvest her from Germany that I have adapted into a song. And I've taught a lot of my students it. And I actually was out once in the woods and I heard someone else singing it. And I was like, that is rad. After 6 years of teaching this song, it's like made it around enough. So to me, that is folk herbalism, is like when you do a practice that's amongst the people, it's not written down, it's not official, it's not medical science kind of stuff. That to me is folk herbalism. And so in German, there's a charm. You ask the elder bush, the Heidelmoor, the elder mother, you say, elder tree or Lady Elmhorn, give me some of thy wood, and I will give thee some of my wood when I am a tree in the forest. And it's to ask permission before you take wood from them or harvest them for medicine. So that's one of my favorites. I have a huge library. I'm like a book fiend. And one of my favorite humans and someone I consider a mentor and friend and peer is Corinne Byer. And she has published a lot of books like the Plants of the Devil and Under the Bramble Arch. And her new book, I think is called Dream Divination with Plants from Three Hands Press, just came out. And she's an herbalist and a witch. We kind of have, her business is called Maple Mist Wood. And we do have like very similar work, but she lives in the Northwest and I live in Appalachia. And I see her at a conference that unfortunately isn't happening anymore called Viridis Genii, where I met her. She's just amazing. And she and I both love the intersection between herbal charms and historical uses of plants and how they intersect with herbalism. And there's a couple other writers like that, but they're more obscure books. They're harder to find. A lot of Troy books out of England. A lot of those books have great herbal references, like the book Wort Cunning that they put out a little while ago. I have a reading list on my website on the first page at the bottom. It's a link to it. And I have a lot of those books on there.
Perfect. I think a lot of people will be interested to see that list, including myself. So I will definitely check that out.
I love a book.
Yay. So another question that I have is, can you share a bit of your foraging witch life with us? Which
we have kind of a lull when it's really hot here in the South. There's lots of always stuff around, but there's a little lull in like July, August. But right now is mushroom season, is like full swing, like black trumpets and chanterelles and hen of the woods, just so many types of edible mushrooms. And I love mushroom foraging. Today I harvested like 12 pounds of chestnuts and I harvested probably a quart of spice bush berries, very on brand, which I grind for spice. And my day today, I woke up, I made breakfast, which was wild rice, venison that my partner hunted, pork from pigs we killed, bacon from the store, and eggs. And then we went and got chestnuts and from this tree that's behind a church that I harvest from every year. I've harvested from 7 years in a row. So I say hi to those trees. They're really productive and they always plop a bunch of nuts out. And then I went to this park nearby and harvested spice bush berries. I came home. I opened up a bunch of tinctures I made last week and stirred them. I made a tequila Tulsi tincture with honey. So I was stirring that, and it's so funny. A jar lid just popped behind me in the kitchen when I said that. Happy. Yeah. And then I processed some dried Tulsi and put it up. And I crumpled up some mint I had dried for some respiratory tea. So that's kind of like my day, is I'll be tending to stuff I've already got going, harvesting more stuff, eating the stuff I've already harvested. And that to me is hedgecraft. That's what I try to share in my program is what does it look like every day to do something little to make medicine or food for yourself or spices. I love to make wild spices. And I don't really have a garden this year because I'm kind of in flux and transition in my life right now. But I don't have the garden to tend to, which is a lot of free time.
A lot of free time, but it also, like, as you're talking, I'm like, anybody who's in the audience listening who's like, well, that's not for me, or I'm interested, but I don't think I could. It just, what you just described is so, most people think I have to have a garden, I have to have this, I have to have that.
Mhm.
And it really is just these little small acts that
Yeah.
builds the practice. So it's like kind of like what we were talking about with herbalism. It's just small little things that you build into your life. And then you sort of do them over and over again every year. You follow like as a witch, we follow the rhythm of the seasons. We follow, our wheel of the year, but I feel like there's a foraging wheel of the year where we live in each of our places. Like, you're in a completely different place than I am, but we have this relationship to the land, and it's about tapping into that relationship to your particular land. If you live in a city, what you just mentioned, not having a garden, there is a rhythm to the land around you, even if you live in the city. And it's about finding the way to tap in and having these little moments that help you to find the food, find the medicine, and just kind of build that practice. So it's, I don't know, I get really passionate when we talk about the life of a forager or the life of a witch. Uh,
It's just organized chaos with lots
it
of plants
really is.
on the floor and like making a mess in the house all the time.
Or like, just even like having a workshop, like it develops. You probably remember when your workshop first started developing, how small it was and how it, I don't know, how has your workshop I mean, I know you have different elements to what you're doing if you're preparing food, um, and you probably have different spaces for each element of your work. But when you first started, like your herbalist cabinet, like it started out probably really small, and then
I've had a funny life. When I was in my 20s, I lived in a tent, a lot of it, and was like homeless by choice, I would say, like a dirty punk kid. And I always had like unlabeled jars of like brown liquid in my filthy car, just like stuffed into baskets or like half rotten. It was like an insanity. And now that I'm 35 at the ripe old age, um, I, oh man, here, I can show you. I'll take you to see my cabinet if you'd like.
yeah, that would be amazing.
So I've just moved into this little rental house while I'm finishing building my house out on my property. And here's one of my little walls of things. And so that's how I keep a lot of my stuff. We got our mushrooms, dried mushrooms, and those are black trumpets. And then there's dried ramp leaf, because we don't harvest the roots of ramps, right? And lots of other stuff and tinctures and oils. And yeah, that's usually how I organize it. Now it's all tidy and labeled and it's wonderful. It's very different, but we can always improve and level up in life.
Absolutely. I noticed that, like, for my herbalist, like, I have like a whole area that's just for witchcraft, and then I have a whole area, and sometimes things intersect. You can only do what you can do to keep it as separate as possible so that, you know, you
Totally.
find everything basically.
Yeah.
But do you have areas like that too? Do you have like your more like dedicated witchcraft space versus your, I'm sure you have like a bookshelf where you do all your research and that piece, and then yeah.
Yeah. I have a studio called Pars Fortuna where I tattoo out of, and that's where my writing studio is. It is incredibly beautiful. My mentor, Balin Lavore, that I tattoo with, is also a witch. And so we have huge altars in there. We have a money altar that we work every day before work. It's really improved my witchcraft practice to have spaces throughout my day. I have my own altar behind me on the shelf, bookshelf on the bottom part. I have my work altar. We have a back room work altar. We have like 80 altars.
But again,
And
it's that building the life, right? It's like
yeah,
place, it's the home environment. When you talk about hearthcraft, I feel like
mhm.
the home is such an element of that. And so we have spaces within, then we have spaces we visit without. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just
Oh, it's such a great question. I think it'd be really cool if somebody made a photo book of people's altar spaces, like just a coffee table book of pictures of people's altars. Wouldn't that be nice?
it really would be nice. And it would be nice to just, especially if you're a newer witch, just to see the different ideas, because we're also individual. And you talk about that in your book. You talk about how individual each practice is just unique to itself.
It
Um,
is.
this might be a good point for me to share something from your book, if that's okay.
Of
I
course.
I highlighted something. I don't know where I put it. Oh, here it is. It says working with plants as a witch allows for every moment to be a prayer and for every smell, taste, sound, and feeling to be an offering. By choosing to deeply know, protect, propagate, and work with plants, we can find not only more ways to see the personhood of each plant we meet, but also get to let them see ours as well. We're allowing an invitation to step a foot back on the well-worn path we all use to walk together toward living a cyclical life with the growing of food, the births of people and non-human creatures, and the deaths of those beloved beings as well. We get to find more ways in a profoundly disconnected culture where feelings of unworthiness and loneliness reign to be embraced.
I'm like, did I write that? That's awesome. Gosh, I always get
Totally wrote that. The
down. That makes
living,
me cry. So embarrassing.
it's on page 19, and right underneath that it says, living in sync with the seasons, this is one of my favorite. I love intros. I love like your whole intro. It's so inspiring to me, and I just think everyone should read it. Um, I think we have like two more questions.
Oh yeah, no problem. I was going to pull up a section of my other book for to read to you the intro because
Oh yeah.
I want to meet your needs for introductions of my but I'll let you ask your questions first. I
No,
don't
no,
want to
no.
interrupt.
I want to do that. Oh, well,
Oh,
okay.
my-
Actually, it was. Can you talk about your new work?
yeah, mountain magic. So one of the funniest pieces of I did make a mistake, and I might have read a few of the reviews of my book of Wild Witchcraft. Many of them were so touching and kind, and some gave just stuff I wouldn't have thought. Really good feedback, that I was really grateful for. Some were unhinged. Um, but one of them was like, I felt so disappointed this book wasn't about Appalachia. And I was like, well, it's not. It's supposed to be for everybody. I'm just from Appalachia. But they were like, this book was sold falsely. It's not just Appalachia. And I was like, I couldn't say it yet, but I was like, there's another book coming. That's just so I thought that was kind of a bummer, but I wrote this book just for them. My new book is called Mountain Magic, and it's coming out in January from Quarto Press. And I had written the intro years ago because I started writing this book like 8 years ago. And I just want to read you a little
Yeah.
snippet of it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The dark shadows of Appalachia's ragged mountains shelter many dreams and longings for an all but forgotten past. The old magics of wart charmers and blood stoppers, and those who knew how to whisper away the pain of a burn, are supposedly just a memory. Long dead are the Yarb women and men who knew all the names of the plants in the forest, which could soothe a heartache or break a fever. There are scores of people with ancestors from every dusty corner of the world who turn their nostalgic gaze towards these mountains and the coves, wondering what old magic lived there and where it is gone. But good news comes down from the mountain. Magic never left these hills. It still lives among the strip malls and the trailer parks, the high-rise apartments and quaint country farmhouses. It lives in city parks and national forests. It lives. So that's the first bit of the book. It's the first chapter is called Good News Come Down from the Mountain.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's a good intro. Yeah, I'll read that book.
Thank you. I'll have a copy sent to you. Um,
Oh, I'm so excited for it. It's going to be great. I know so many people who are so excited. I love the specifics. This was your first book. I think it's brilliant for what it is. I don't think I wasn't looking. I don't share that criticism. That
I think they just read that I was from Appalachia and in their
yeah,
mind.
and they were like, "Oh, this is Appalachian." So
Yeah, I
uh,
tried to include a little bit there, but yeah.
yeah, I think what I love about the new book that you have coming out is this element of old magic, and
Yes.
also these elements of these people that we want to get to know, these characters that maybe we learn in stories, because
Mm.
storytelling, folk stories have this have old magic in them, and they have these characters, and these characters are not characters, they're real people who are our ancestors, and they have these stories that are so powerful, and they had this connection to this magic who, and I hope that in your book maybe we'll get to know these characters more, because I all I had access to was just the table of contents, so I could see um, kind of the beginning of what your intro, where it said the different, not that they're characters but people, medicine makers who had different roles.
Yeah, the folk healers of Appalachia are unique in American folk medical systems. The wart charmer, the blood stopper, the burn whisperer. There's all these, the dowser, the water witch. Like there's all these like very specific jobs and magics that were born in the mountains from, African, indigenous, and European influence, all being, smashed together in a super intense terrain that required all of their collective powers.
Do you think
And
that with some of this old magic, this is just offhand here,
yeah.
that people can not have access to this, right? Because they don't have this book yet. Um, and kind of feel called to one or some of these practices, or have some sort of relationship to these medicine makers, and feel, I don't know, lost, feel, or somehow like they know it in their bones, in their blood, they can like feel it, and they
Mhm.
just don't have access to find it yet, because the magic is still there.
Yeah, and that's what the book
Those
is about.
practices aren't practicing anymore though, correct? Or are these all ancient, or is some of this modern?
A lot of it is, it's never gone anywhere, and that's kind of what the intro is about. Like
Yeah.
there's this myth, one of my teachers, Byron Ballard, who has written a lot of books on Appalachian folk magic and is one of my mentors. She talks about the myth of like magic being gone, and it's just that a lot of people don't talk about it because a lot of, Appalachian folk magic is viewed through the lens of Christianity, because most people in Appalachia are Christian, and that they also practice magic, and that was fine. It wasn't seen as devilish or anything unless you were practicing bad magic. But they have good magic for that, I guess, to fight it. And that's why we have charm doctors in the mountains that specifically fight witchcraft. So it's, a lot of people tell me, like, I was born in Appalachia in Western Pennsylvania, but I was not raised Appalachian. I have now lived in Appalachia for most of my life. But to some people, it would probably be like, why is she practicing Appalachian folk magic? She's not Appalachian. And that, half of that's very valid. It's a good question. But I always say too, like, you got to be from somewhere, and so we're all from somewhere. And I actually just got a new book today. One thing I've been doing to ground myself more like appropriately in my own medicine traditions is I'm mostly Irish. And I just got this book by Patrick Logan. It's called Irish Country Cures, and it's a book about Irish folk medicine. And what I love to do is read books like this from specific parts of my ancestry and kind of cross compare it to what people in my region were doing. And I'm like, oh, cool. I can see the link there. And that's beautiful. It kind of helps me feel comfortable practicing that because it does come from my ancestors. Um, and, there's no black and white thinking or hard and fast rules about what you can and can't practice in life so far as you're not causing harm to other people. And I think if you're not making money off of it, if you're not doing it without permission, and you're not doing it like super publicly, then and you're respectful and coming from a place of reverence and love, there is a lot available to us all as practitioners. And listening to that voice and saying like, I really want to learn that. That sounds just like what I've always wanted. That was kind of what happened to me when I was young and I found out about witchcraft. And I was like, you can actually just do that? That's amazing. So it's, yeah, you have to listen to that voice. But there's so much information. It's not as obscured as I think we've been led to believe.
Yeah, and we also have access to our own intuition, and we have our lineage within us, if that makes sense. And so we have more access, probably even more than books than we think, if we
Mhm.
just follow the path and just keep doing the work and spending the time to learn, whether it's through a book or through your own interactions with nature and letting your intuition guide you. But there's a place and purpose for both. And
Yes.
I'm just really excited about your next book, and I love that you're sharing all this wisdom with everybody who is listening. And I'm going to link as much of what we spoke about, any books that you mentioned, anything, if you could help me a little bit, that would be
So,
great. And
yeah.
I can I can put a little list together, and then definitely send people over to your website so they can read some of your work and read your blog, and also, have a little bit of time with that list that you recommended. I'll
Mhm.
definitely put a link for that as well.
That pretty much
And
mentioned all the books. So that should hopefully get us all set.
yeah, and I had another question here, just in case we needed it, but I don't know. Should we read it and see what it says?
I'm sure.
How do you think a new witch, or even a seasoned witch, can become a wild witch? And I want to change that to an Appalachian witch, in which we kind of touched on that already, but maybe even just an herbalist or a forager or someone who uses wild ingredients. What is the first step, I guess, to take?
If you want to work with wild beings in your witchcraft practice, I would say you have to first meet the wild, right?
Yeah.
So you need to go out and ask those hard questions like, what are wild spaces around me? Who has access to those spaces? What does it mean for me to be in those spaces? One thing I've done in my own practice to try to figure out, and I don't have the right answers, I'm just one person and I'm not right. I'm not an authority. I'm just a random person that's passionate about stuff. And so, um, meeting the land, meeting the wild beings, getting a good mentor or multiple ones, hopefully, uh, that can teach you foraging, that can teach you herbalism with real people, so you don't accidentally hurt yourself with a bad plant or mushroom ID. And even with that, I've done that before when I was overconfident. Luckily, nothing permanently damaging, but got to go slow, like you said. Always wise, right? Go slow. Get some great books that are based in history and acknowledge Indigenous and Black contributions to herbalism and the land. And think about, when you have access to learning about those things, what could you do to help someone else get access to those things too? Like, could you pay for someone to take a class with you in the community who might not have access? Those are all questions I would ask. And think about, whenever I use things like tulip poplar, it's a very common tree in my area. We use the bark to make baskets, and that's a Catawba indigenous practice. And I go and teach classes at the Catawba Nation now, and it's really amazing to get to interface with those folks and like see if you can have helpful, contributive relationships with people in your community that have historical legacies with this space, respectfully, not pushing yourself on them and stuff like that. Like, I do think that is the first step. And I'd love to be able to go back, to my homeland someday, to Ireland, and learn respectfully from my elders there. But until that time, I want to figure out a good way to do that here. And I encourage everybody listening to figure out what those ways are too.
Hmm. That is so, yeah, I love that. Hmm. Well, thank you so much for being here and for chatting with me and giving some answers and some things to think about to others. It's wonderful, and I really appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for your time and
It's
your
such
interest
a
in my
pleasure.
work.
Yeah, and I look forward to more time. I'm so interested in all the things you do. So I just keep watching you and keep seeing what you offer and be involved in some way.
Well, thank you. Well, have a great day.